Hi guys, Russell here from Homebrew Republic. Welcome to another brew review. Right now I'm in November, so I'm thinking about what I'm going to be drinking over the Christmas and January period when the days are getting longer and hotter, and it's been a long time since I've made a lager. So that's the mission for today, a light-bodied, crisp, clean lager that'll be perfect for those hot summer days. For this brew, I'm going to build a simple recipe. I'm using the Black Rock Lager kit as a base. I've never used this kit before. According to the description, we've got the characteristic aroma and bitterness of a crisp, clean lager, which doesn't really give us much to go off. For this recipe, I'm going to discard the factory yeast that comes with the Black Rock kit, and I've opted to use a craft series yeast. I've chosen the Mangrove Jack's M54 California Lager Yeast, which is of course specifically designed for lagers. The defining characteristic of the brew is that it ferments at ale temperatures, which are higher than lager temperatures, whilst maintaining a neutral flavour profile. To give you an example, the ideal fermentation temperature range for most lager yeast strains is between 10 and 13 degrees Celsius. The ideal fermentation temperature range for the M54 California Lager Yeast is 18 to 20, which we can obviously see is a lot higher. The instructions on the M54 yeast suggest that we use a fermentation temperature range of 18 to 20 degrees, but they're quite clear about being in this range. Most yeasts, especially if you listen to one of my previous videos, have a suitable range, which is often wider, and then a narrower ideal range. And what that does is it lets you know where you have flexibility above or below the ideal range. The instructions in this case are very specific about staying inside the 18 to 20 degree range. So my guess is it's not going to be very forgiving above or below that temperature range, and temperature control is probably going to play an important part in this brew. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know by now that I prefer liquid malt extract over dextrose. It gives a little bit more body and a nicer mouthfeel. For this brew, I've used a 1.7 kg tin of Black Rock Ultra Light liquid malt extract. I've gone for ultra light because I don't really want to build up the malt characters, and I want to keep the colour nice and light and crisp and clean. I am going to dry hop this brew. I've chosen to use the Green Bullet hop, which I've never used before. From what I found online, the hop profile is described as a complex flavour and aroma consisting of dark fruits, floral and pine notes. Another review I found online said along with the confusing but unique mix of flavour and aroma, the Green Bullet hop also brings a smooth and refreshing but slightly peppery spiciness. As I mentioned, I've never used Green Bullet, so here's a little history lesson. The first ever hop plants were planted in New Zealand in Nelson in 1842, and by the 1850s the first large commercial crops had been established. Between 1920 and 1960, most of the big crops suffered from black root rot, so basically creating a high incidence of death for the growers and the plants. Now what the growers did was they went to what was then called the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, which I assume was a government department, and asked for a research program to be set up to identify a way to evade black root rot. Now the outcome of that research program was to cross breeds of hop plants that were resistant to black root rot, and created 3 hop varieties that were specific to New Zealand. Now ultimately from those, what was then created later on was a new hop variety which we now know as Green Bullet hop. And Green Bullet hop, I think it was released to the market in New Zealand for industrial farming or commercial farming in 1972, and since then has become effectively a workhorse of the New Zealand brewing industry, and it's probably best known today as the hop that is used in Stein Lager, which is an institutional lager and institutional beer in the New Zealand market. Process. First up, I'm going to get the wort mixed up in my fermenter. I'm going to take it down to the garage and drop it into my fridge to bring it down to pitching temperature. I'm going to use the fridge to bring the temperature range down to 18 to 20 degrees, which is the recommended fermentation temperature range for the yeast, and I'm going to drop it in at that point. One thing that I did notice online, I looked around at some of the reviews for the yeast, which I also haven't used before, and one of the things that came through a couple of times was that the yeast can be a little bit slow to start, so I'm going to keep an eye on that but not be too worried if it does take a day or two to get itself underway. I will be holding that temperature range 18 to 20 right through the whole fermentation. I've actually hooked a dual temperature controller up to my fridge now, so I'll show you that when we go down there. For the hops, I'm actually going to hold off dropping the hops in until around about day 8. And when I do drop the hops in, because the flavour and aroma profile is so unique, and because I haven't used it before, I don't want to go overboard, so I'm basically going to use it as a finishing hop to get a feel for the hop this time. As I said, I'm going to drop it on day 8, and I'm going to use a very reduced quantity back down to 30 or 35 degrees. I might play that a little bit by ear based on the taste samples coming out of the trial jar as I approach there. I expect total fermentation to take between 10 or 14 days, but I'm not really going to put a time limit on it. I will go by specific gravity, so I'll be looking for specific gravity to stabilise for 2 days in a row. I suspect my final gravity will be somewhere down around the 1.010 to 1.012 mark. I'll obviously take a gravity reading before we start as well. And irrespective of where gravity goes, I want to leave the hops in the brew from the point where they go in. I want them to be in there for probably about 3 days before I start my preparation process for bottling. I have mentioned I want a really nice clean brew, so I'll be using findings. I always cold crash, or normally always cold crash before I bottle. So I'll drop findings in 48 hours before I plan to bottle. I will start cold crashing 24 hours before I plan to bottle. I always rack off into a bottling bucket, and when I bottle, I'll be using fermentation drops. All that said, too much talking, not enough brewing. Let's get this brew on, and I'll see you guys on the other side for the Official taste test. Cheers! Hey guys, welcome to the garage and the brewing fridge. So we've had the wort in the fridge cooling down. Would have been, I don't know, high 30s, maybe 40, something like that, because of the boiling water in the bottom. But what we have here is a temperature probe. And I mentioned earlier I've got this hooked up to a dual temperature controller, so the heat pad, whilst it's connected, will not be in use. The challenge for this brew will be keeping it cool enough. So the fermentation temperature range we're aiming for is 18 to 20. We're currently sitting on 20 exactly. Got our yeast there ready to go, and we're going to pitch our yeast. There we go guys, Brew yeast. Right, yeast is in. So I'm heeding the warning that it might be slow to start. I'll keep an eye on it, but won't be alarmed if it takes a day, maybe 2 to get going. We'll see. Keep you updated. Welcome back, guys and girls. We are day 8. Little bit of bubbling activity in the airlock. Fermentation is definitely slowing down as expected for where we are. I have taken a gravity reading, and we are smack on 1.020, which is at the very least where we want it to be before we add our hops. In terms of temperature, we have basically been holding right on 20 degrees, so at the top end of that ideal range. I have had a little taste out of that trial glass. Really nice. It's a very crisp, clean flavour. I'm really happy, and as a result I have just kept the hops to a minimum, so 30 grams. There we go, right there, 30 grams, ready to go. So let's get that lid off and get them in. There we are, guys. Nice level of fermentation activity, still ticking away. There we go, hops, let's get these in. Right, Commando, they will do their thing. I don't use a hop stock. It will put a bit of organic matter in the brew, but combination of finings, cold crashing and sediment filter, get rid of 99.9% of that in the bottle, which I'm more than happy with. And the argument for Commando is the greater transfer of flavour and aroma characteristics. So from here, fermentation does still have quite a way to go. So like I said, I'm not going to put a time limit. I will be looking for specific gravity to stabilise for 2 days in a row before I call it finished. Sort of expect it's going to get down to between 1.005 and 1.010, somewhere between those two. So we will see. All that said, going to get this lid back on, going to let this do its thing. As I talked about in process, once we do finish fermentation, I will add finings 48 hours before I bottle. I will cold crash 24 hours before I bottle, and then I'll rack off into a bottling bucket using a siphon. Right, that's it. Cheers, guys. See you on the other side for the official taste test. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back to the official taste test of the Black Rock Lager. Here we go, guys. Bottle. Let's get it open. Check it out. Good little pop. Bottle, glass, pour. Here we go, guys. That is our finished product, and I am exceptionally happy. Check out this color. Okay, so for me, this is probably about a 3 to 4, maybe even a smidge lighter on the SRM color chart. It is a really, really nice light gold. It's come up really well. You've got a huge amount of clarity in there. Just a really nice, clean finish. The head, we've got a really, really nice white head. It is a very soft head. It falls away very, very quickly, but it's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go to taste first today. So first of all, what I would say, very, very light body, very crisp and really, really clean finish in terms of there being no off flavors. So as a summer drink, summer afternoons on the deck, it's really awesome. It is perfect for that purpose. What I would say is the Green Bullet hop has given us a really, really interesting element of flavour and ultimately the aroma. Okay, Green Bullet hop, I'm sort of casting my mind back. What we had was kind of dark fruits, spiciness, a little bit of pepperiness, but the key thing I took away from the description that we were given was that it's a really, really complex flavour profile, and that's what it's done in here. It's given us a lot of complexity, which for me isn't a massively definable flavour that you attribute to kind of one thing. It's just complex. And that's kind of coming through on the aroma as well. If someone asked me to describe the flavour, The words that come to mind for me is old school sophistication. It's really cool. It's very much, to me, a more traditional lager. But it's good. This brew, I think at Christmas it was 4 weeks. So this is somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks now. Should have checked that before I came on, and it's only got better. What I found, as always, even though we use a really low level of hops, at that 4-week mark it was still good, but there was probably a little bit more definition from the hop flavour on the front coming through around that 4 to 6 weeks mark. The later we got, the more it settled in, the better it's become. So again, if you followed this recipe, if you can leave it to 8 weeks or plus, much better off. The other thing that I would say is using the hops. It hasn't created what I would consider a noticeable hop forward profile. It's probably given it a very light profile, but nothing that turns into a really hoppy beer by any stretch. And what I would say is, it's just, if I try and compare this to what I think of as a standard lager or a really straight clean lager, it's given the flavour profile a little bit of depth, which is really, really cool. Interestingly, when I was looking around online, I found a recipe published by BlackRock, which was really, really similar to this. So a couple of things. First of all, the recommended final gravity on that recipe was 1.008. I got down to 1.009 and my ABV was 4.33%. I had thought that was a little bit light. I had thought that we might get down to 1.005, or that would be around the right place. Interestingly, on the recipe they said, which I said before, 1.008 was the target and 4.35 was the target ABV. So this has come out spot on compared to that recipe. The two main differences between what I did and what was on the recipe was, number one, the hops. So they didn't use hops on their recipe. But two things on that. What I have found out is that one of the hops used making the malt in the base kit was Green Bullet. So if you are going to hop, the Green Bullet was perfect because it's perfectly built on and extended that flavour profile and given it a really good connection between the front of the flavour profile and the back of the flavour profile. The other thing that I would say on that is, if you do prefer lagers that just have that completely clean, completely straight finish, I tried a trial glass of this, which I mentioned earlier, and it tasted exceptional. Even from the trial glass, I was like, wow. And it tasted so good in that trial glass, and that was before I put the hops in, that it almost gave me, it was almost tempting to go, I'm going to scrap the hops and just go with this. That was how good I found it. So if you do prefer that really, really clean finish, you could follow this recipe and just not dry hop. I'm going to come back to those hops again in a second though. The other main difference in the recipe was that, interestingly, they used the Safe Ale US05 yeast. So apart from the fact that it's generally better suited to ales rather than lagers, one similarity between that and the yeast that we used is it's obviously going to ferment for at ale temperatures. So I'm speaking from memory, but I think the Safe Ale is suited to fermenting at 20 to 24 degrees. So it would be well suited to brewing through summer, especially for those who are brewing at ambient temperature. The other thing with that yeast is it does have a very subtle citrus tone to it when you ferment. And one thing, even before I'd found that out, when I was drinking this, in my head the whole time I was going, do you know what? A hint of citrus would set this off. So for me, we've got a really, really nice depth of flavour, and I was like, man, if you put a little bit of citrus in there, you'd get a little bit more of a well-rounded finish, a little bit more breadth on the flavour. and I'd been going this, if I kind of thought about how I would do it. Actually, sorry, going back to that yeast. Interestingly, the Safe Ale yeast, if you used that, would probably have done this. You would have got that slight citrus tone to the flavour, and it would have been a really nice way to go. I was super impressed with the Californian Lager Yeast, the M54. I thought it was awesome. The thing that I liked about it the most is it's really supported that clean finish. So if I was brewing again, especially lagers, and just looking for a straight clean finish, I wouldn't hesitate to go to the Californian Lager Yeast. I think it's a great yeast, and I also loved that it was comfortable fermenting at that slightly higher temperature range. Coming back to the citrus and coming back to the hops, if I was going to try and bring that citrus tone in, knowing what I know now, sure, we could try using the Safe Ale yeast, that's one way. What I had thought was the Cascade hop. We used 30 grams of hops from Green Bullet. For me, in a lager, I wouldn't be going past that, and we used it as a finishing hops. We brought it in quite late to give us more aroma and a little bit of flavour, but mostly aroma. Number one, I wouldn't use more than 30 grams. If anything, I would bring that back to 20 or 15. Number two, if I did want that citrus note in there, I had been thinking the Cascade hop, and I would have used, say, 10 to 15 grams of Cascade, in which case I certainly would have pulled the Green Bullet back. So overall, I wouldn't have put more than, I wouldn't, if I'm doing this again, put more than 30 grams of hops in, and if I was looking for that citrus note, I'd use 10 to 15 grams of Cascade, and then the rest in Green Bullet, and go from there. But amazing brew. I'm super happy with the result. The most important bit, one of my friends said, I was drinking this over Christmas, so this got shared quite widely. A number of people tried it. Trying to think the comments I've had back. So the real proof for me was actually from my sister. So a couple of years back, I've always remembered this conversation with my sister where we were drinking beer, and she was like, why does everything have to be hopped? I just want a good, straight, clean lager. And that's her jam. She really likes clean lagers. She's not really into the hoppy generation that we've got into. So I always kind of had her in my mind when I made this, and she was always kind of the litmus test to me. I'm like, if I give this to Mel, is she going to like it, and what's she going to say? She gave it a thumbs up. She said it was really good, really drinkable, really nice. I also shared this in particular with one of my neighbours. He said the biggest problem with it was getting motivated to get up off the couch afterwards, and it was a good thing that he didn't have any more bottles, because he would have gone and had another one. So I'll take that as a compliment, but all in all, great brew. It's been really well received. I have turned this into a formal recipe on the website, homebrewrepublic.co.nz. I call it the classic lager. It's published. I'll drop a link below. So if you want to get hold of the recipe, which includes those variations that I've mentioned earlier with the hops and the yeast, go grab it, check it out, give it a try, see how you go. The next brew review you see will be an American IPA. That has been a phenomenal beer. It's probably, it's been one of the most well-received beers that I've made and shared with my friends, and it's had great feedback. So I'm looking forward to sharing that in the next review. I've got a pear cider down now from the Mangrove Jack's Craft Series range, and next week I'll be putting down a Pilsner, a Czech Pilsner, but I'm going to change up the format of those videos. I've got something different in mind, which I think is really cool, and hopefully you're going to like. Time to wrap this up. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. If you like what we do, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to comment below. But all that said and done, cheers.
Cheers!